While our speaker's getting set up, I'd like to welcome everyone. My name is Stan Caldwell. I'm Executive Director of the Traffic 21 Institute and Mobility 21 University Transportation Center. You'll see them on the banner here in the back. Traffic 21 is a university-wide institute that looks at transportation research and education from across the university. So we have faculty from at least 5 of the 7 colleges across the university and students working on all different transportation projects. And the Mobility 21 is our university transportation center that's funded by U.S. Department of Transportation. And so we're one of 5 national university transportation centers with the theme of mobility, hence the name Mobility 21. And again, we fund faculty from across the university, and we also have some partners at the University of Pennsylvania and the Ohio State University. And we have these meetings every 2 weeks. It's a seminar series where we try to bring together both faculty and students from across the university with any interest in mobility and transportation. But again, we want to try to encourage faculty and students to come together since we're all not in one department or one degree. And we do these every 2 weeks throughout both semesters. And so please encourage your colleagues to come. And we also encourage a lot of interaction after, both with the speakers and with your colleagues here. And so for today's presentation, I want to introduce Sarah Cho, who is our Women in Transportation Fellow for Traffic 21 and Mobility 21.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah, as Stan had mentioned. Thank you all for coming out here today. I hope everyone has had a great summer. Just before we start the presentation, I want to introduce Bonnie as well, and she's the new Women in Intelligent Transportation Fellow, and she's comes from Chicago Transit Authority, and she's in the Masters in Public Policy and Management Master's Program. So welcome, we're really excited to have you. And also, we have a transportation club here at CMU. It's not just limited to Heinz, it's to gather every student, everyone across CMU that are interested in transportation and to really build a community amongst the students. So if you're interested in it, please come and talk to me whenever after the presentation's over. I'll be really excited to talk to each and every one of you. So without further ado, I want to introduce Stefani. She is an adjunct professor of architecture at CMU. And she has combined her career in architecture and urban design, teaching and also public service. So her work includes anything from urban housing for special populations, urban design and planning for neighborhood revitalization. She's a principal in the firm of Perkins and Eastman, and she's responsible for numerous award-winning housing developments. And her design for special population includes shelters, transitional housing, and residential environments for the elderly. She was also a planning commissioner for the city of Pittsburgh for 6 years. So it's it's a small part of her extremely long list of experiences, and we're joining here today with her 2 graduate students, Sai and Rebecca. We'll be hearing about her Millvale mobility project. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll give the floor to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We're really delighted to be here today. Sai, Rebecca, and I are a team that had the privilege of working on this project with our partners in Millvale. We were fortunate in being granted a grant from Smart Transportation Group, SAM's group, last August. And we began this project in the fall and finished it up. Well, it's got a little bit to go, but the report was issued in June. So we'll explain all of that, and we'll take you through this project. It's a little different than perhaps a typical transportation project because the issues really are broader than just the transportation itself or just the right-of-ways. Millvale is a town that has been disconnected from its riverfront. You're probably familiar with this small town on the north side of Pittsburgh along the Allegheny River. Millvale like many towns in western Pennsylvania, began with a mill. Early on, let's see, let me just say, that was the overall purpose of the project. We started in the fall with our urban design studio in the Master of Urban Design program in architecture. And the work was done through Remaking Cities Institute, which is our research arm of the schools. So we were able to continue that more in-depth research with Cy and Rebecca, who were part of the urban design studio in the fall. So in the spring, the three of us were able to then continue with the benefit of the grant to pursue the ideas that had been laid out in large form in the studio. So back to Millvale. This disconnection between a town and a river is not unique to Millvale. It's a story of a lot of towns, not only in this region, but in all of industrialized world. Because the town, while it was really ideally settled in some respects on the banks of a small stream, Gertie's Run, that discharges into the river, it lost its connection to that stream and to the river very early when the mill was constructed and train tracks were built to access products for the mill. So the separation from the town to the river is compounded today, although the mill is gone, by the highway, Route 28, which takes the place of that. And you can see where a ramp to the highway occupies almost the same profile as the mill area originally. But this is a pretty complicated intersection with multiple highway ramps. And the entire connection to the riverfront involves some of the most sticky problems that we've actually created ourselves. So we were looking at ways to improve the connection. But let's walk you through that connection. Rebecca, do you want to take this is just our series of, we could just very quickly make this trip starting from Grant Avenue in downtown Millvale.
Go back to the map really quick. Grant Avenue is this street here. So we're going to travel all the way through this way. So this is Grant Avenue. You can see the highway kind of in the distance. This is the berm that has taken the place of the mill here. You can also notice that there's not a whole lot of pedestrian crossing markers here. This is, again, approaching that overpass. I should say the first overpass. This is the little pedestrian allowance that they've created underneath that first overpass. As soon as you're past that, you kind of go up the ramp a little bit around this corner, and then you're faced with this pretty daunting crosswalk that crosses basically the ramp from the highway. So people are speeding pretty quickly and then immediately whip around this corner, and there's not a whole lot of visibility. There is one sign that I'm not sure we'll get to see this little signalized crossing marker here. Beyond that, that's about it. And then you'll go through the second overpass here. You can see a train already crossing here, so you'll have to go through. Sidewalks all stop. This is just a kind of rear little road here. You cross train tracks, go through a third overpass where the train tracks go overhead. This one is particularly creepy and kind of dirty, grimy looking. And then you're at the river, sort of. There's a private marina here that has kind of cluttered the public right of way. So beyond that, there is the river, but it's hard to see. So really what you have to do is turn another corner, past the marina, go through a parking lot, and eventually get to the river there.
It's quite a trip. And as you can see, pedestrians are not particularly welcome along this trip. You can take that path, but you have to either know where you're going or have a lot of faith that you'll end up at a place that is pedestrian friendly. So we were concerned from what we heard from the community were concerns about safety, were concerns about access, and in the larger picture, the cost of the disconnection is an economic one as well. The riverfront is now being improved dramatically by the whole trail system. So people throughout the region are riding, walking, enjoying the trail along the river, walking right by or riding right by the stop where they might come into Millvale, where there might be some amenities, a place to stop for a bite or a drink, and an opportunity for Millvale to benefit from that traffic. Well, that's not happening. You can imagine the trip. We haven't shown you the trip back, but it's just as daunting as the trip to the riverfront. So for reasons of quality of life as well as safety and economics, we started to look at alternatives that might reconnect. So one of the first things, I'm sorry, won't take us back through that. One of the first things that the class did in the fall was to do a benchmarking of cities who have addressed the problems of being disconnected. As I said, it's not certainly unique to Pittsburgh or Millvale. And we found some really inspiring examples. Seattle's new outdoor sculpture park that winds its way right across the highway. Bridges, ways of bringing public space from the city right down to the riverfront. And in this case, Cincinnati completely restructured its relationship to the river over a long period of time, over actually several decades. And we visited there as our field trip in the fall, which was very instructive and inspiring. Out of this fall semester came a whole series of ideas, of which these are just a representative sample, of ways to make long-range connections. We're talking about big picture. If you think of that example from Seattle, that didn't happen in the short term. That was many, many years in planning. We felt that it was important for Millvale to step back and look at what some of the long-term options are. And some of the ideas that were presented were tunneling under, in this case, actually utilizing the tunnel that Gertie's Run travels through, and expanding that, which would help to take care of the flooding that backs up into Millvale. Coming through the berm was another idea of just tunneling right under all of the highway. This actually coming through the highway system looked at more incremental elements that might make a park string through there. And several projects looked at how to go over the highway by, in this case, this was actually Rebecca and Sai's version of an idea that was pretty ingenious to come up this slope. It takes you to the famous Max Vanko mural church, and incorporating that, which is an important regional asset, into the path that would then take you across in a lightweight pedestrian bridge to the riverfront. So, in the long-term picture, that could offer a lot of benefits to the community. Another idea was came from a very careful study of the way those highway ramps work, and realized that with a small change in signaling and direction, you could make this ramp down from the highway to Lincoln Avenue redundant, and take it offline, turn it into a pedestrian ramp, bike ramp, and use it to get you across the highway. You still have to come under the tracks, but that was a pretty ingenious idea as well. So lots of things that when they were presented in the final presentation to Millvale in December were exciting to people who had been part of that process. Those created a context for then the in-depth work that we did in the spring. And we identified as the goals of this work, working very closely with the steering committee from the community, 3 goals: to improve safety, to engage local stakeholders, and to lay the groundwork for greater investment in the community. Our steering committee consisted of the mayor, major leaders within the community, stakeholders who own property in this area, a representative of the county, a representative of the trails. So we had a group that was diverse, represented a variety of interests. They were also hard to bring together at any one time, so as it ended up, we did a lot of communicating by phone and by email to the steering committee, and we had a core group that met with us every month to guide the process. So I think everyone would say that it was a very community engaged, community-driven process. So one of the first things that we did in the spring was to take a deep dive into existing conditions. One of the questions, for example, is what does PennDOT own? There was a lot there. You could ask 5 people in Millvale, and including PennDOT, and you get 5 different answers. So we actually traced down the documents, which itself was not easy to do. They don't release these the way they used to. But we convinced them that we were up to goodness, not bad things. So, so we did determine rights of way. That point where Rebecca pointed out all of the boats were stored at the marina, just where you could see the river. Well, the reason for that is that the street continues right to the river. It was the launching point for the old 43rd Street Bridge, and the pier is still there, and you can see the pier in Lawrenceville on the other side, pretty close to the robotics center. So that bridge, which was replaced by the 40th Street Bridge, still exists in terms of a right-of-way. But Millvale has never taken advantage of that. It would be an ideal way for you to be able to glimpse your destination as you're coming from the town, and also a good opportunity to create a destination itself there, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. That's something that will be a longer term project, but could make a huge difference. So, Sai, do you want to mention our interviews?
Sure. Hi everyone. So we conducted email and phone interviews with about 15 to 20 people in Millvale, business owners, residents, advocates, and we came out with these series of questions asking them what they see as hindrances that benefit that deter people from entering Millvale. How do they, as stakeholders, see these sort of strategies that we are suggesting improve Millvale? Anything we should keep in mind when suggesting the strategies to cross under, through, and over PA 28, and getting their suggestions on what sort of features and amenities that they think would be good for Millvale. So in general, the first 3 major hindrances that all the stakeholders actually stated were the fact that there's pretty much a lack of safety when it comes to crossing the highway. The fact that cars just speed on through, considering that little curve that goes around the berm is, they consider it as part of the highway, so they just speed on right through. The lack of signage, so that no one from the trail side or anyone crossing on PA 28 knows about Millvale as such. and just lack of amenities for bike infrastructure as well. That's where a lot of the features and amenities came in. A lot of them suggested more places to eat, more bike infrastructure, bike servicing, and more signage was pretty much the general suggestion we got from these stakeholders. So, signage on the trail as well as signage in Millvale, just suggesting the better ways to cross through, under, or over the curve and the 1888 type.
In all the conversations that we had during this whole year, there were suggestions that there were really existing assets that weren't very well used. So there are events that happen down at the riverfront that people in the town don't come to because of the difficulty of getting there or just not really knowing how to do that. And there are places in town for people who are on the trails that they don't know about either. So the goal here was to find short-term strategies that could start the ball rolling toward a bigger long-term strategy. And we were looking at things that could be accomplished in less than 2 years, things that would make a difference for a relatively small amount of money, so high impact, low cost. We looked at 8 different strategies. These came out of the interviews, they came out of the meetings that we had, they evolved as we went along. So the first one was to improve this crosswalk, and all of the crosswalks that you saw were barely visible on that path. There's some really clever ways of painting crosswalks that would really slow down the traffic. And that's an example from Europe where it really does look like bars floating above the street, and that causes the traffic to slow down very dramatically. But we also learned from PennDOT about the limitations of what we can do, the need to maintain the white stripes and paint only carefully within the lines. So, Rebecca, you want to do this?
So our second short-term strategy was to look at placement and the sort of way we can craft a more interesting path to the river by including murals. This one, the You Are Here one, is from my hometown of Baltimore. We like this one a lot because it shows you a location, and it's also just sort of an interesting way to look at the space. And the bottom 2 images are from Pittsburgh, so it's not a totally crazy thing to do. And actually PennDOT did suggest that this wasn't totally out of the question, as long as they can maintenance the space around it and behind the mural. They're like, yeah,
They were actually encouraging this, just as long as we could plan with them in terms of where they need access for inspections. So the third option is to plant street trees. This is, again, a modest investment that would have a long-term benefit. And this helps as one of the strategies for slowing down traffic by visually bounding the field ahead on the street. So it looks less like a highway. But it also has all the advantages that trees have everywhere. They're good, and they cause shade, and they reduce heat island. So we think they're a good urban design strategy no matter what. We looked at the whole issue of traffic patterns, and the fact that this was really designed to serve the highway is fundamentally the problem. Was not really intended to be a complete street. PennDOT was willing to consider the idea that, for example, along East Ohio Street up here, there's more lane capacity than seems to be used. And if traffic counts would show that excess capacity is there, then they would consider the idea of having parking along there, which would be a way, again, of slowing down traffic, providing better access, and generally extending the city just that much closer to the water. We investigated smart signaling as a concept, and we think that this might, in the long term, be a part of the larger package. It's not really a key short-term strategy, simply because the problem is not moving traffic. The traffic seems to move too well. It moves very fast, and it cuts through this area, mostly in the path that takes you out to the suburbs in the north. So it's cutting right alongside Millvale and continuing beyond it. As I say, it's more a part of a bigger set of strategies. Sai, do you want to?
Sure. One of the sort of great icons to Millvale would be this entry signage at the start of the town. We recommended it at this crosswalk over here where one turns left into Millvale. I'm sure, as you all know, in the United States there are several examples that we can go off of. But this idea of a signage this large and at the entry of Millvale would just create that sense of pride in Millvale, as well as, I mean, what bigger signs you can get than just saying welcome to Millvale right at the door.
So there's a way to bring the town to the ramp rather than the highway extending into the town. This is just one of the strategies of saying the town starts here. Okay. So.
Another way to kind of bring the town forward, also to do the same thing with the trees, to limit the field of view. And then also to create a sort of town character, was to include street banners. This is sort of a classic, I think, urban design strategy, but I think it does a lot to both announce events in the town, but also create kind of an atmosphere that is a little bit more lively than exists currently. And so we would hope to continue that then towards the river as well, so that kind of outlines a path all the way to the Allegheny.
And the last strategy was to use lighting as a technique for wayfinding, helping to guide the path and increase a sense of safety after dark. Lighting this path, but particularly lighting this destination that you can see through here at night when you're not going to see the river. At that point, you could at least see this destination along your way. And our eventual thought was that this would make a great plaza, now that it's not needed to connect to the bridge. A public plaza. There's an old brick building here that could, by some enterprising owner, be turned into a cafe. And this could be a very welcoming public place right there at the riverfront with terrific views of the river from that platform, but also a place of arrival, which is missing today. So those were our 8 different strategies. We were working so closely with our steering committee that it was really important for them to be able to visualize what these different strategies might do. So Rebecca and Sai came up with a really ingenious way to share these ideas. Bring it up. And what we brought to the steering committee meetings
If it works.
right. Yeah, it seems to be.
I might just be repeating it again.
Okay, well, fortunately, we did get that. Yeah, okay, there you go.
Alright. So the idea with this is a live Photoshop document that we prepared based on the Google Street View image, basically using some of these design strategies and just sort of pasting them on top of this image. This proved pretty useful in the public meetings and just to kind of talk with community members, they were a great way to visualize something as sort of simple as maybe a different color crosswalk, and then to also add more than one option. So if there was a crosswalk and also trees, what does that look like? What does that change your perception of the space? So clearly, starting out, this looks very much like a highway. There's not a whole lot of pedestrian access here. If there are murals, if there's a speed table, which PennDOT kind of noted, but a different positioning of the stoplight, the entry sign, that was sort of a big selling point for them. Trees, and then obviously, as I said, the Google Street View image, there aren't a whole lot of people, so we added people to kind of suggest that maybe something else is happening here. So again, trying to test different combinations, what looks, feels right, and what seems plausible.
So we did that for several different views on the way to the river to help visualize the options, because our goal in this project was not to give them a specific do this, 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 but to give them a prioritized menu, saying that as soon as you have some capacity, these are your high priority items, and these are less priority. So our goal was to work with the community to assess these different strategies, and we developed what we call the design strategy evaluation matrix, where each of the 8 different strategies was laid out there, and their contribution to specific goals was designated along in the chart. So physical goals include better pedestrian safety, improved wayfinding, and better aesthetic qualities. The most value is the green, and the mediums are the reds. I'm sorry, the darks are the high, and the mediums are the less bright. So in the physical strategies, these apply to the physical strategies. So the orange is the high, the yellow is the medium, and the white is the low, and similarly for each of these categories. So in the financial, we looked at cost benefit, economic impact, and business connections on a very broad level, because we weren't doing any detailed costing of these strategies. In terms of process and long-term operations, the strategies, implications for maintenance, stakeholder involvement, and its impact on infrastructure. So those were the basis that we evaluated these on. This framework was developed early in the process, so we started talking about it in January. We had a draft that we met with the steering committee on and finalized it in February, and then it became a consensus for how we evaluate these strategies. And as a result of this analysis, we prioritized the we ranked these strategies. So in the top category are the murals, the street trees, and the entry sign. They all seem to have relatively high impact for low cost. Medium priority included improving the crosswalks, hanging the street banners, and modifying traffic patterns. Obviously, this one would involve more resources, but would also potentially have some more impact than some of these, but altogether not as much of a value as in the top. And then the low priority we identified as the lighting and the smart signaling. We also discussed with them how these might work collaterally. So if their primary goal in terms of fundraising were these, but they found an opportunity, say, to improve crosswalks, that would fit very nicely as a collateral improvement. But it suggested that they would do better to go after fundraising for these than to make these their primary fundraising goals. So that's those were the essential recommendations that we left. The next steps include a community-wide presentation. We made several presentations along the way, but we discovered that when we had completed everything in June, we hadn't exhausted all of our research funds. So we went back to Millvale and said, what can we do for you? And they said, we'd love to have another event where we could share this with more people, because the more people who are aware of this, the better. So that's that's in the process. It'll happen in the early part of October. We met with PennDOT, as you heard, and they laid out a specific process that needs to happen, starting with a formal letter from the borough asking for engagement in design. And they are going to weigh in on every single one of these improvements, whether it's planting trees or improving lighting or doing a crosswalk. So we knew that they needed to be part of the team, and we drafted a letter for the borough to present to PennDOT to make this formal request. The third and fourth really involve a long-term strategy for reinforcing the value of the riverfront to the community and vice versa by promoting riverfront events such as, if you've been there, you've seen the food trucks that now come on the weekends. There are events that happen in the Millvale Riverfront Park as well. Pursuing co-development with the marina, that was the idea of this cafe or event location and plaza at the end of the street. And finally, to initiate fundraising for the improvements, which they are starting to work on already. So it was helpful having one of the representatives of the county on our steering committee offering suggestions for where the county might be able to provide some funding, and similarly the Trails organization as well. So that's where we are. We issued the report in June, and as I mentioned, we have one more community meeting to present at in October. So it was a fun project, right? And we were really pleased at the partnership from Millvale. That was really key to the whole thing from the very beginning. So yeah.
If I could just mention one thing, this was funded under the Smart Mobility Challenge grant we put out last year. What it was we were doing a lot of smart city activities with the city of Pittsburgh for the last few years, Traffic 21, because our motto had always been, research, development, and deployment through partnerships. So trying to find real world problems and link them up with faculty and students like this. But we wanted to specifically reach outside the city of Pittsburgh into other communities in the whole region. And this was a really good example of how the students and the faculty were able to engage with the community and apply some research and education into solving a real-world community problem. And just want to commend you on that. This is, this is the ideal format of what we're looking for. It's neat to see it happen. And what other? Can you just give a little, maybe a little update on how Millvale is changing itself over time? With the younger people moving in there.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, we should say thank you all for the grant that helped us do this. This was really an ideal time because Millvale is on the cusp of turning from a backwater, forgotten town to a place where really cool things are happening. So a few examples of what are bringing people to Millvale would include Mr. Small's concert venue. Has anybody here been to a, there you go, right? So that's attracted people who also then frequent the new breweries that are there, the Grist House and Dry Log. Anybody been there? And the new library, which was a great story. It was Millvale's own bootstrapping of a library because they didn't have one. They were one of the towns in the county that never got its own library. And they got a building, they raised the money, they are now connected into the countywide library system, and they do a lot of great work with the kids there. It's a very active place. We held a lot of our meetings and conversations there in the library. It's impressive. And Millvale, and all of this work that we did was built on their eco-district planning. So Millvale is the first in Pennsylvania, the first town to have an eco-district. And that's meant that they have started broad long-term planning that has supported short-term initiatives such as rain gardens, community gardens, solar panels on their community center downtown, which is now being developed as their refuge location. So that the solar panels combined with battery backup gives them emergency, a place for people to come and during flood emergencies. Longer term issues, the biggest one is the flooding itself, and that's a watershed problem. 95% of the water that floods Millvale comes from Ross Township and above. And it's from the parking lots up there in those shopping areas. So that's not a problem that Millvale can solve, but they are actively working with the other communities to try to find the means to support the improvements that need to be made further up. So it is a great time to be looking at ways to enhance Millvale's identity, because people are now saying, oh, where's Millvale? And to connect Millvale back to, now we have a whole trail system. That's a regional system. People are using it not only for recreation, but for commuting, and to have that right at your doorstep. And it's a wonderful asset. So this is a great time to make those connections. Yes?
I was wondering, did you consider Lawrenceville into the planning? Because a lot of people bicycle across the 40th Street Bridge, walk across, and that this has been going on for like at least 35, 40 years. And it would just seem that once you get across the bridge, then you're in the same spot you were there away from Millvale. You get from that intersection into Millvale.
Yes. We didn't identify specific strategies, but we did talk a lot about improving the safety for both cyclists and pedestrians coming down and into the riverfront area. So that one is particularly a PennDOT controlled.
And then I was wondering, like, when they rebuilt Highway 28, why didn't they consider this problem then? Because if you look at the north side by Hines, they basically built a trail from that walkway across all the way to the 31st Street Bridge to make it easier. And I assume that was input from the community to get them to put that sidewalk in. And I'm just curious, at the time that they were rebuilding 28, it would have been, seemed like an ideal time to tackle this.
I think everybody at this point would say absolutely right, even PennDOT, and they're taking a lot of credit for improving that intersection over what it was, acknowledges that they missed a few things. And so they're happy to work with the community at this point, but I can't say why they didn't look at this in the first place. Maybe they needed a smart mobility plan.
Hi, so I loved your use of color with murals and crosswalks, and I also really like the idea of like bringing in trees, hearing the background and how it's an eco district and how that really sticks with their branding. My concern with the design of it is if you're purposefully obstructing views, are you going to potentially increase the likelihood of someone getting hit if they can't see cars coming from the other side, if cars can't see them coming? So how did you really factor in whether or not it would maybe increase the likelihood of someone getting hit if you obstruct views of trees?
Well, we were also concerned about that, but and we talked with PennDOT because you know that nothing will get by PennDOT in terms of sightlines. That's one thing they're on top of. But we were concerned from the very beginning about what could be done to visually transform the street from the broad highway, which is intended to be safe at 65, to a street that's really designed for traffic at 25 or 35 miles an hour. There's a big difference between containing the view and obstructing it. So it depends on where you plant the trees, and it also depends on what those are. For example, that sign across the highway, there are very good examples of ways that you can do that without causing an obstruction, either physically or visually. And that would certainly be taken into account. With trees, interestingly, as long as you plant a fairly mature tree, like 2.5 to 3 inch caliber, the branches don't start until well above the eye level of the driver. So trees are no more a problem than a signpost is in a sense. But that issue that you raise is absolutely essential. It's an important part of this because it has to be safe for driving and for walking, everybody.
Do you have your work online anywhere, or everything you've done?
The final report is, I think, published through the Traffic 21 website. Or
Yeah, I don't know if we have it up yet, but did you send it to Lisa Kay?
yeah, yes,
Okay.
I think.
So yeah, we'll have it on our Mobility 21 website under the projects. There's a whole project database, and if you go to the project, we'll have the report linked right to it there.
We'll also have it on Remaking Cities
Okay.
website.
And if you can't, you can just email. I'll give you my card, and if you can't find it, we'll email it to you.
Stefani, I think this is a good example of looking at issues that might have started off being single issue like transportation and looking at it in a holistic way, multidisciplinary way. So you were looking at everything from storm water issues that turned up earlier to pedestrian safety, to bicycle safety, to transportation, and then to development and to community pride. All of those things have to be looked at. And I think a generation ago, we didn't do it that way. So we will just solve the traffic problem. And the other things we'll just have to figure out what they need to do. By starting at the ground up and saying, what are the basic issues here, not just transportation issues, but all the other issues. And then engaging the people who live there, who work there, who run businesses there, who are elected officials, you come up with a solution that makes a lot of sense for those people. Because, I mean, Jean Gell, the famous urban designer from Denmark, says cities are for people. Highways and bike trails and buildings support the life of people in the city, rather than the other way around. And so I think this is a classic example, starting with a student project, a master's program, and then actually turning out to be a research project funded by this university. I think it's a classic case. Give you great accolades for what you've done.
I think what you're raising though is a point we all have to be aware of because we become specialists, all of us, right? For the more education we have, the more we tend to know something in depth, and we need teams, we need to collaborate across disciplines in order to get that fuller picture. And that's something that I think we're trying to do more in this university. And it is what makes for breakthroughs and exciting work that I think we all really feel proud of when we do that.
I
But
think it also says something about bureaucracies. PennDOT is not bad at all. And they need just to be engaged in this process in a way that they can get what they need. Their statutory requirement is safety and cost estimating and all the things they need to do. On the other hand, they particularly want to engage the communities. And the current administration in Harrisburg and the previous one has made great efforts in doing that, set up certain committees that work on it. And this is an example of they're saying, okay, come back to us now again, and let's talk about a real solution.
I think that was one of the real accomplishments, sort of the hidden accomplishments of this project, because going into it, if you'd asked people that were part of this from Millvale about the possibilities of what could happen here, they almost universally said, no, PennDOT won't let us do anything. Okay, that it was just, they had some negative experience with PennDOT or had heard about PennDOT, its reputation. So finding that PennDOT is open to making improvements and bringing people together to work together was, I think, an important step forward from this point.
Did you think about engaging Pat Transit? Because there's really not a good connection between the city and Millvale.
Right.
And I mean, the 1 and the 2 bus go through there, but they're coming along 28.
Yeah.
And there's another bus, the 64, which kind of terminates in Lawrenceville and starts, I think, at the
Waterworks
the one down
in Fox Chapel.
Waterworks?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
And it could terminate in Millvale just as easily, because it's not too far to the 40-yard bridge from where it terminates.
Yeah.
And that would be a better connect, people from the city could then come into Millville much easier.
Yeah, that was part of the research. And PennDOT, the Port Authority told us that they don't run more buses because they find that they can't hold a regular schedule because of traffic backups.
Well, there wouldn't be, it wouldn't seem like there'd be traffic backups
So,
at that point as much.
yeah, I think the response is if we could get traffic counts done, if PennDOT was willing to pursue this, we could also bring the Port Authority back to the table with that information. Yes?
Hi, thank you. And I'm curious about if you've been interacting at all with Friends of the Riverfront.
Yes, they were on our steering committee.
Oh, that's great. And I think a project that I'm with Metro 21, which is a partner of Mobility 21. We're focused on smart cities. And we have a similar model of deploying projects in the community. And so we're looking to work with the Friends of the Riverfront. I think something they're really interested in is connecting the riverfront and the paths to the communities. That it's like as people bike by, they have no clue what's on the other side of that fence, right? And the people on the other side of that fence have no clue that they have this amazing amenity. And so it's, creating that connection so people see it as their asset, not these, guys on spandex shorts just, going through their neighborhood, right? So I'm curious if that's something that, especially as Millvale is getting more cool with hipster, with the, brew pubs, maybe the biker community wants to hang out there or whatever. So is that something that is part of your study where you're looking at that kind of community amenity connection specifically with the bikers and the waterfront park?
Exactly.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and Courtney from Friends of the Riverfront was with us.
Great, all right, excellent, thank you.
It's a two-way thing, it benefits both.
Great, thank you.
I have a question, Sarah, specifically for Cy and Rebecca. So how did you get involved in this project? And so your background as well, if you don't mind me asking.
Well, we were part of the Fall Semester Studio project. We both just started the master's program in urban design last year. So this was our first project going into school, which was pretty fun.
Yeah.
And then Stephanie had asked us afterwards. We were partners on the project, and I guess we worked well enough together that Stephanie wanted to work with us further in the spring and then throughout the summer as well. But yeah, both of our backgrounds in architecture.
Yeah. She's from Penn State and I'm from Syracuse, so we did undergrad, and I worked for 2 years before coming in. I mean, it made a big difference because she's more the productive producer, and creates various options, and I'm more of like the reflector, look back, analyze them, introspect sort of thing. It worked really well.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Yeah, it worked really well. Well, thank you all. And